Hello and welcome to another episode of the CFAL Talks Economic Podcast. My name is Pamela Ferguson, Vice President of Investments at CFAL, and I will be hosting this episode titled A Reflection on 2020 and a Look at the Year Ahead. I'm joined in studio with our expert panel, President and Founder of CFAL, Anthony Ferguson, Lashell White, Investment Manager, and Angelo Butler, Senior Analyst. So let's get right into it. The reflection on 2020 and a look at the year ahead. As I mentioned, we have in our company Mr. Anthony Ferguson, President and Founder of CFAL. Mr. Ferguson has been a leading voice in our country over the many years on economic and financial issues. Is it okay for us to call you Anthony, Mr. Ferguson?
Sure. We do it all the time. So.
Great. So I want to take this opportunity, Anthony, to get your reflection on the Bahamian economy over the past 12 to 18 months, capturing the twin economic event of COVID and Dorian, and to get your idea on the key lessons learned and your thoughts on the long-term prospects for the Bahamian economy.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to be on this second CFAL podcast, but my first invitation. It's a pleasure to discuss economic matters of significance and important for our clients. Reflection on the Bahamian economy over the last 12 to 18 months. As you all are aware, our first hit was Dorian, followed closely behind with the COVID-19 pandemic. As you know, when Dorian hit the Bahamas, we essentially lost about 20+% of our GDP, with Abaco losing about 15% and Grand Bahamas 7-8%. So it was actually a little over 20%. And that had a significant negative impact on government revenues, as well as government expenditure, as government had to support a number of businesses and, of course, the people in Abaco and Grand Bahama. Now, this was followed up very quickly with COVID-19 again, which we estimated impacted our economy by about negative 15 to 20% in 2020. And as such, our government revenues declined substantially. And of course, on the reverse side, our debt went up substantially to the tune now where I believe our debt is close to 10 billion. Certainly will be 10 billion by the end of 2021. The implications here are the economy. Prior to both Dorian and COVID, our economy was slowing. And has not really had any significant growth over the last 5-6 years. And so, in addition to having these two major events that impact our financial position, our economy was really struggling before this. And so it made a bad situation worse. And so I think the lessons to be learned from this is that we really need to develop a long-term strategy, and everyone talks about this long-term strategy for the Bahamas, but we really need to put in place a strategy that both government and opposition work in tandem, such that not when one come in and they just change everything, because the problem is, as I see it, we change stream in the last many years, every 5 years, in terms of what are the priorities of each government. And as such, that impacts the capital expenditure. It's very difficult for businesses to plan. And of course, because of this, we get no traction because we're not really building for the future, in my opinion. And so, longer term, I think we need to do a better job of planning. The National Development Plan that was developed, perhaps they should look at this and see what they can pull out of it. And of course, I think the Economic Recovery Committee made some recommendation, but I am not aware of any implementation of any of those recommendations. So that's my few thoughts on the Bahamian economy.
Lashell, what are the biggest economic issues that you see happened in 2020?
I would definitely say COVID-19. We also have, and that caused a catalyst for higher unemployment and slower economic growth. But I think that, in my opinion, economic growth and unemployment have been an issue for the Bahamas for many years. Simply put, as a developing nation, we're not growing fast enough to, quote unquote, develop. So we won't have any long-term sustainable development. We've had lackluster growth rates, and because of this lackluster growth, unemployment has continually gone up. And then we had Hurricane Dorian. Then we had the COVID-19 pandemic, and that has exacerbated what was already a difficult economic position.
And I think one side of it too that we've seen in 2020 is the impact on persons' mental health from the aspect of confidence. And I read an interesting article the other day where they said that persons who are about 30 years old now, have gone through 2 recessions or crises since graduating high school, and those persons are increasingly becoming concerned about the future. Their decision making in terms of planning families and, having the confidence to go out there and purchase homes, vehicles, have children. Population growth is important for economic growth. And so I think, that side of it is taking a pretty significant hit. Persons are also not used to being locked inside their homes for these extended periods. And so, I think it's just taking a mental toll, and it'll be interesting to see how, what mental state persons come out of this with, whether they have the confidence to cause these economies to recover and rebound the way, everyone is projecting. So I think that's, one major issue we saw in 2020.
Yeah. So did any of you see 2020 coming? And what were we talking about at the end of December 2019, the beginning of 2020?
No, I definitely didn't see 2020 coming. I think that we were all blindsided by it. You saw, at the beginning of the year, you heard this news, you have this virus in China, and then by late March, early April, it was here. And then our life as we knew it had changed. So I think that at the end of 2019, going into 2020, you were looking forward to the continued redevelopment of Abaco and Grand Bahama, and hoping that would run along smoothly. And then also 2019, we had record tourism numbers. So you were thinking, 2020, this is going to be it, the year we're just going to knock it out of the park. And then all of a sudden, everything just came completely to a halt.
I also think at the beginning of 2019, there was a focus on, government transparency, whether the government's fiscal consolidation measures were bearing fruit, and, whether there also was the increase in the value-added tax rate that was, a lot of persons were feeling. And so those type of issues we were concerned about. Of course, Abaco and Dorian happened, but we had the comfort that Nassau was still okay. And so Nassau would be able to kind of hold us up until then. But like Lashell said, we went from record tourism to no tourism. And so, the entire archipelago was pretty much shut down. And I don't think anyone in their lifetime would have ever projected something of that nature.
Yeah, I would add to what both Angelo and Lashell said. I think at the end of 2019, 2020, the one thing, though, we were not expecting was robust growth, just because of the 20+% drop in our GDP because of Abaco and Grand Bahama, and we were concerned about debt management and what the government will do to grow the economy. Bearing in mind that 20% of your GDP was pretty much wiped out. And so, again, like everyone said, it was a shock. But this is why you have to plan for these unforeseen circumstances. We live in an archipelago in a hurricane zone, and we're only one disaster away from economic disaster. And so, as such, I believe it's incumbent upon ourselves, or the government, the regulators, to ensure that we manage our affairs such that when these to be expected shocks hit our economy, we could withstand it for some time. And even in your personal life, we like to tell our clients that they should seek to have between 3 and 6 months worth of savings so that they can manage themselves should they lose their job or there's a illness or something. And I think practically as a country we need to start thinking and doing the same thing.
So we didn't see 2020 coming, and it was obviously a very difficult year for many, particularly our country and the fall in tourism. So what are the major themes for 2021?
I think the driving theme, of course, will be the vaccination. It's right now seemingly the silver bullet that everyone's depending on for recovery and some return to normalcy. And I agree in the sense that, I don't think there will be any full normalcy until the virus goes away as it relates to, work travel resuming, conferences, persons in stadiums, mass tourism and so forth. Now, I'm an avid reader of comments on social media. So I think one challenge will be the acceptance or willingness of persons to take the vaccine. There's a lot of skepticism, and rightfully so. The vaccine was produced in record time, but it will be on the governments to kind of educate and prove that the vaccine is safe to get more adoption of it. Fortunately, I saw an article this morning that said, although there's been a lot of resistance to vaccinations, particularly in the US, they're now dealing with an issue where demand exceeds supply. So I think that's one positive going forward. And I think that will be the driving theme of 2021.
Yeah, I agree. I'm one of those people that are skeptical about the vaccine. I mean, but because it's been done in such record time. But I think that if you can get enough persons vaccinated, you need to get people more comfortable with traveling, especially for the Bahamas, where we rely so much on tourism. And like Angelo said, now not seeing people doing as many conferences. People aren't moving about as they used to before. So I do think that the vaccine is definitely a game changer. And we may, if enough persons buy into it, or if enough persons get it, then we may see tourism not return to the levels we saw in 2019, but slowly recover. And by extension, our economy may start to, recover and start to grow a little. But it will take a while.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think in addition to what my colleagues just said, austerity will continue to be the mantra. I think companies in 2020 kept staff on. I think in 2021, a number of companies would look at their financial position and decide to reduce their staff, not furlough. And I think you've seen in the press recently where some companies, has started that process. So I think you're going to see a major tax increase by the government in the next budget cycle. They really have no choice in the matter. What I would caution the government, however, is that the tax should be targeted with priority programs such that we, the people, can see where our monies are going, and that it has the impact of helping those who are less fortunate and not overburdening the companies that will have to pay this, so that they don't think about downsizing even further. With respect to tourism, I really don't expect us to be up to 30-40% until probably the end of the year. The vaccine, I think one way to get the vaccine, Bahamians is interested in taking the vaccine, is make it mandatory to go to Miami. You have to have a vaccine, and trust me, everyone will take the vaccine. So, the government leadership said they are going to take it. I think there is skepticism, and rightfully so. I'm not a scientist. I have no understanding in that space, but I think me personally, I would probably take the vaccine. I just think we have to prepare for the future.
And I think to your point of the tax, I think one challenge for the government will be, how do you sell it? With the value-added tax, it was sold as this tax that was being created to pay down the debt, right? Now, any tax we bring in now will only be to kind of reduce the deficit. So once again, you're going back to the well, but you're not it would be impossible to close the deficit in this environment and actually pay down the debt. So I think, that trust inside the government is possibly going to erode even further.
Yeah. I mean, if on that note, right, I think one mistake, I understand the social, having a heart and soul position with not reducing persons' salaries in government. But at the end of the day, private companies had to make some tough decisions. So for instance, as an example, and I'm just choosing this, not out of any malice, but Bahamas, they had no flights. But, when you think about it, those persons could not do anything sitting from home. But yet we continue to pay their full salary. So, I believe the government should have considered seriously reducing salaries by 10, 15%, so that we all in this together and then apply that to the persons who lost their jobs completely. As you said, the thing about tax is that once the government get their hands on that, they will continue to tax. And so, when value added was initially contemplated, it was also contemplated that we were going to get away with custom duty. But of course, we continue to have custom duty. We continue to have value-added tax. We've increased it. I wouldn't be surprised if the government doesn't increase it even further. But I believe all taxes are on the table. I think you can see corporate tax. I think you can see personal income tax. And so I don't think Bahamians have a problem paying tax. I think the problem is they have a problem paying taxes that are going into what we will call a black hole, and we're not seeing the country develop and seeing where our taxes are going.
Agreed. Because if you look at the collection of taxes, every time we increased tax, we borrowed more. So revenue is not our problem. Trying to get more revenue via taxes, although taxes are important overall for the government functioning, but that's not our problem. I think our problem is the wasteful spending and the mismanagement of the resources that we collect. And like you mentioned, Bahamians wouldn't have a problem paying taxes if the taxes were used to better their lives. So I think the problem that we constantly have is the mismanagement and the wasteful spending of tax dollars that does not yield economic growth to help us down the road.
I agree. I think that we don't understand, our policymakers don't understand the concept of productive expenditures. Mm-hmm. So I see now that they want to cut capital spending, but like Mr. Ferguson said, they didn't cut any salaries during the pandemic, even though there was no work being done, for example, at Bahamas Air. So I think that we just have to get to a point where we understand how to properly manage our economic affairs. Yeah.
I would say the one good thing out of this, if anything, in 2021 and beyond is we will see faster modernization of our payment system, working from home, where we have a lost productivity with persons picking up kids every day. I think one estimate is that we lose a couple $100 million a year from just school pickup. So I would say that going forward, you'll probably see increased productivity. You'd see more work from home, which should, for y'all millennials who like to talk about work-life balance, probably improve on that. I think the modernization of government and private sector with respect to technology, that's going to be a significant improvement, hopefully going forward.
Yeah. So a lot of people are depending on the vaccine to really push recovery across the world in terms of economic growth. So what does our recovery in the Bahamas hinges on?
Boy, that's a tough one. I mean, we have our economy is just basically based on tourism, and that's basically just all gone away. So I think, we can't just sit there and say, we have to wait for the tourists to come back and then the economy will recover. I think that we have to look at other industries. I saw an article in the paper this morning where the Minister of Agriculture was talking about how we could reduce our food import bill by $200 million by growing our own food. I just think that you also have a lot of people in the news talking about the oil exploration going on that's sort of like divided our society. But I think that we just have to look for new industries, and we have to make policies in place so that it's easy for people to engage in new industries. The cost of doing business in the Bahamas is very high, and it's also very difficult to start a new business. So I think it all just goes to government policy in opening up the economy for Bahamians to allow Bahamians more participation in the economy.
And you would note that most economies are driven by consumption, and the bulk of our consumption comes from, at the end of the day, tourism filtering through other sectors of the economy. So I think for one, this is an export-driven economy, so it will, at the end of the day, continue to be an export-driven recovery. Like Lashell said, however, in terms of food, we don't necessarily have to export food, but if we can reduce how much food we import, it has the same net effect on the economy. So I think the food, like she said, possibly we should look into a bit more forestry. I always wonder, why don't we grow grass? All of this vacant land we have, it's, in my opinion, hurricane proof. Why don't we, why are we importing grass when we have all of this land just sitting vacant and so forth? So I think it's stuff of that nature that will have to be done until, like we said, in 1 or 2 years when the tourism begins to come back.
I mean, the challenge though, right? And it continues to be. Our number one impediment to growing this economy or diversifying it away from tourism is our energy. We have tried year after year, and we have failed year after year, and the cost of energy continues to be very high. If we can get our energy costs down by 30-40%, the sustainable impact to our GDP is around 1 to 1.25%. That is significant, bearing in mind that for the last 10 years, our average GDP was less than 1.25%. So I think we need to address energy reform with urgency. The other challenge is our healthcare system, and COVID-19 clearly points out that you need private insurance if you want to have a longer life. From what the stories I've heard, and so people don't have insurance, so they can't get health care. And the health of a nation is the wealth of a nation. And so again, we need to find ways to reduce our dependency on services out of Florida and the U.S. for healthcare, but also it encourages our Bahamians to live more healthy lifestyle. And then finally, I think. Tourism is always going to be with us. And so what we need to do, however, is we need to take this opportunity to encourage the Bahamas to be a sustainable, eco-friendly, touristic, heritage, cultural destination. We have always focused on the sand and the sea, but we've never in recent years focused on our culture and our heritage, and we have not created any linkages between agriculture and fisheries, supplying the hotels, etc. And so I think the next administration has to do a better job of linking all of these things so that we can have better traction with respect to employment and growing our economy.
And to add to that, you mentioned energy, which is very important, and also other infrastructural development, which include transportation and telecommunications. We always say we're an archipelago, so it's very expensive. We do not need an airport on every island. We need to develop our seaports so that people can travel between islands reliably and affordably. And also telecommunications. We thrust into this remote learning, and that require access to technology as well as telecommunications so that we can do this remote learning properly. And so we really need to improve our infrastructure in those areas. So I don't think this is a time to be cutting back on capital expenditure, but to be leveling up in those areas that can generate, that are productive and that can generate revenues down the road.
Well, I mean, the government indicated, or the PM indicated that they were going to have more public-private partnership. Right now, we spend about 150, close to 200 million in government subvention to these various corporations that, in the big scheme of things, does not add any serious impact on our Bahamian lives. And so they have to address those expenditures and try to reduce them by at least 50% over the next year, and eventually over a 3 to 5 year period, phase them out completely.
So thank you, Lashell, Anthony, and Angelo. That brings us to the end of part 1 of our economic podcast. It was really a pleasure, and it was a wonderful discussion. Thank you, audience, for listening. We at CFAL trust you are keeping safe and adhering to all of the COVID-19 safety protocols. Please do subscribe to the CFAL Talks podcast on Google or Apple for more thought-provoking and educational discussion on the Bahamian economy.